Okay, so this is a pretty basic overview of the DSO. Although the policy directives are consistent across the province, I can only really speak to the Toronto region. But as I said, the eligibility, the application package, all of that is consistent across the province. So, okay, so to start, the DSO started as part of the Social Inclusion Act with the previous Liberal government. The Services and Supports to Promote the Social Inclusions of Persons with a Developmental Disability Act was short form SIPDA. It's really just moving, the philosophy of inclusion, moving into community-based, as opposed to looking at institutions. So as part of this transformation that resulted in the closing of the institutions. The purpose of the DSOs was to, as it says here, to support better planning, so that previous to the DSOs being implemented in 2011, families, when they were moving into the adult sector, especially in the Toronto region, would have to contact 37 different agencies. They'd have to do the research. Which list should I be on now for day program, for residential, for whatever I need? And so families for a long time were saying, I just want to call one number and find out which list I'm on. And the ministry was thinking they couldn't do kind of planning because they couldn't get an unduplicated list, for example, of people waiting for a certain level of support for group homes. So to have one list in the database and have, and to be able to help families by just having one place where they could go and get the information they needed was really a part of the impetus behind developing the DSOs. So the DSO is a single point of access for all new adults with a developmental disability. So it's the place to call. We recommend that people call at age 16, although they can't start accessing supports until age 18. So there are 3 stages of the DSO process to really simplify things. The first one is eligibility. Is someone eligible for the DSO? And I'm going to get into the details of that. And then after eligibility, there's the completion of the application package, which determines the individual's support needs. And then once that profile has been created based on that assessment or application, we match and link to available resources, mostly funded resources from the ministry. So ministry-funded support services include residential services, group homes, supported independent living, cells, community participation services and support, so day programs, job training. Some job training, job coaching, you don't have to go through the DSO, but some of them are ministry funded and they do. Respite, professional specialized services like clinical supports, person-directed planning, PDP, family support workers, FSWs, APSWs, adult protective service workers. So one of the mandates of the DSO is information provision. So that's our first policy directive from the ministry. So we are legislated to have to provide information. So how do we do that? Well, we have a website, and when I was reviewing this presentation, I thought the website's still up, but not for long, because the ministry has funded our DSO Ontario website to be refreshed, and it actually, from what I've seen, it's sort of in a draft version. It looks really great. There are videos on it explaining eligibility, explaining the application process. So it's not as wordy. There's not so many long articles to read. And each DSO will be sending resources from their particular area to that central website, so that will be posted in one place. So that's something new and exciting to look at on the horizon. So I didn't take this off yet because I don't know exactly when the launch date's going to be. But this one is specific to Toronto Region, but it has information on it about eligibility, and it has a list of all the agencies in Toronto that provide funded resources, and lots of frequently asked questions and good information, and it's in French and English. So we get a lot of phone calls at the DSO, and so we provide a lot of information on the phone, we answer questions over the phone, and we have a partnership with 211 because we found that 10 to 15% of our calls coming through were not really related to the DSO. So it might be questions like, I'm part of the DSO, but I need to find out where my nearest food bank is, or I lost my passport and I'm in Spain. Well, that's not the same passport. So it was 211 has been great because they have the multi-language, very responsive. They email us right away when they get a call that has to do with the DSO. They have access to a read-only access to our database, so they can see if someone's registered or not, what stage they're at in the DSO. Then they can say, oh, okay, I can see you're at this stage and you're waiting for this. What's your question, and get really more specific, and then be able to email that to us. So we can, so they don't have to tell their story twice, and then we can respond. So that partnership with 211 has been really great. And we do presentations like today. We do lots. We do presentations at school fairs. Sometimes we get together with ODSP and Passport and do like a panel presentation to people who are transitioning from high school into the adult world. We've done presentations to the school psychologists about what we need for eligibility. We've done presentations to emergency room staff just around what to do as part of a panel, like who to call if you have someone with a developmental disability, or where to find resources and support. So we'll go anywhere and talk to anyone practically. We've also been at some conferences, and yeah, so that's been a big part of what we do. Between like September and December, we presented to over 600 people. So we really try to keep on top of doing a lot of outreach. Okay, so back to eligibility. So eligibility, so the DSO confirms someone eligibility. So what does that involve? There are 3 criteria for eligibility. One, you have to prove your age, so date of birth. Have to be 18 and over, and or 16 and over to register. And we also have to confirm if someone's an Ontario resident. So you can see a picture of a passport, a birth certificate. Health card is good. It's got both the date of birth and the residency piece in it. So we usually ask for a photocopy of that. And it's really helpful because it's really great to have the exact spelling of someone's name, because you can take it over the phone and mishear one letter, but when we get the photocopy in of the ID, like it just sounds like a little thing, but it can really hold it up if we can't find the person in our system because there's been like a slight spelling error, or the date of birth is off by one number. With the high volume of people coming through, it's so important that we're accurate. So what we get a lot of questions about is the proof of developmental disability. So we do ask for something from a psychologist. So some people often ask me, well, there was a psychological report done when this person was 8. Does that qualify? Yeah, it does. They don't get out of date. Unless the person is really on the borderline level, or there wasn't a clear diagnosis at that time. But if someone has a clear diagnosis of developmental disability as a child, what we might ask for is maybe an up-to-date IEP, just to see what their level of support is, and that can help us. But usually an older assessment is just fine. So we will ask for a psych assessment. If the person doesn't have one, we refer to Surrey Place Centre, which is the agency under their umbrella, and we refer to their adult program psychologist. And over time, they've become really experts in doing the eligibility assessment. So they they have a psychologist who is designated to do eligibility assessments, and it usually takes between 3 to 6 months to get the eligibility assessment completed. So yeah, otherwise known as an IQ test. So we look at, to meet the cognitive criteria, they have to have an overall score of 2 standard deviations below the mean. The mean would be like 100, and so they would have to be below that, and this 2 standard deviations is about 70. So just to get into a little bit more detail about that, so we're looking at, if you're looking at an IQ of 70 or below, so between 70 and 80 we would consider borderline. And so there's a standard error, can't remember the exact term, but so up to about 74, 75 we would probably consider, but we would really take an in-depth look at the assessment. So somebody with a score between 55 and 70, would it be in the mild range? And somebody who would be in this range would be somebody who would maybe live in supported independent living, maybe would have some basic reading skills, could tell time maybe to the hour, and be able to identify all kinds of currency, but maybe have some trouble making change. Somebody who could take the TTC on learned routes, and maybe learn most aspects of like laundry or cooking with some repetition and some teaching. So it would be somebody. I think you can probably visualize like individuals that you have been working with who would probably fall within that range, and that's really the majority of the people coming through the DSO. The next range is moderate, 40 to 55. So this would be somebody who would be living in a group home, but still be able to be able to perform most of their self-care or activities of daily living independently or with some prompting, but would need to be accompanied probably most of the time. And in the severe and profound range, that would be someone who would need maybe somebody with them at all times and help with all areas of self-care. Are there any questions about that, the different ranges? Okay. So we have different options. So that's the main option. If somebody has to meet the criteria for developmental disability, not only cognitive, but in the adaptive functioning. So as it says here, like in 2 or more areas, like communication, self-care, work, leisure, social, interpersonal. So there are adaptive living scales that would show us where that person would fall. Sometimes we get somebody, rarely, who would be in the mild range who would have really excellent, maybe average level self-care skills. But then they might not, then we would look at their academic skills. That means that their family really helped them learn, everything they needed to do to live independently. And but then we would also consider looking at academic skills to help support that academic eligibility criteria. I mean, adaptive academic. The academics would support the adaptive eligibility criteria. Okay, so that's option 1. So we have option 2 for eligibility, and sometimes the psych assessment doesn't tell the whole picture. And I think we probably met individuals where you look at their psych assessment and you think, I would never have really thought that with this person, but some people on the psychological assessments have areas of real strength, and they can score very high in some areas, whereas some others have areas of real challenge. But if you looked at their overall score, that really doesn't tell the whole picture about this individual, because maybe the high score raises their overall IQ score to a point where they wouldn't be eligible. So that's why option 2 was developed, and it's for those individuals who might have, one area of real strength, like a really amazing memory, or you know, a really good ability to read, but maybe not quite understanding the content, but for identifying words and reading, they would do really well. So option 2 is when you look at the psych assessment, it has 4 categories or indices, which verbal, nonverbal, processing speed, and working memory. If 2 of those 4 categories are below the 2nd percentile, that person would meet the eligibility criteria. So any questions about that? A little bit technical. So getting into the adaptive skills, so practical skills, social skills, and as I said before, it also has to be 2 standard deviations below the mean, so it has to be in the range of that 70 and below on an adaptive scale. But we also can kind of look at academic as part of that. And then the age criteria. So the challenges that this person with the developmental disability has to have originated prior to age 18. So if somebody had a head injury at age 19, they wouldn't qualify, even if they tested out as having a developmental disability after age 18. So you've gone through the eligibility with somebody and they're not eligible and you really disagree with that decision. So what do? So you request a review of the eligibility decision. And a review is essentially an appeal of the decision. So, so this is a 3-stage process. And so stage 1, within 25 business days of receiving the eligibility letter saying that the person is ineligible, that they would have to request in writing from me the review of the eligibility decision. It could be by an email. Usually someone phones me and I disagree and they're mad, and then I say, you know, send me an email or send me a letter, but try and send me some new information. And if you don't have any additional assessments or documents, write me a letter, explain why you think that this decision is not right. Ask your school for maybe a letter from the teacher or some documents from the school, or you know, just send me what you have, and we'll take another look at it. So, or I get a letter within that time period. So then I have 15 business days to respond. And I usually consult with one of the psychologists at Surrey Place Central. I bring the whole file down and I say, what do you think? And we go through it all together. And then we can decide, okay, are we going to overturn the decision of ineligible or not? So say we don't, and I send a letter back saying, sorry, you're still ineligible. And I explain what the eligibility criteria is, and may send a bit more information about it. And then stage 2, the person can request a stage 2 review of the eligibility decision. So what that is that it goes to the president of Surrey Place, and so they get it, and then they maybe consult with another psychologist and then their team. They say, okay, well, Karen, you were right, they're still ineligible. They'll say, Karen, like, this person is eligible, what were you thinking? So and then stage 3, which we've never had, would go to another DSO. So that other DSO would make sure that we follow the timelines, we follow the eligibility criteria, that we reviewed all the documents, and that it was an open and transparent process. So usually, because we're very fortunate to be in Surrey Place, when we work with the psychologist, if there's any kind of doubt, they'll offer maybe to do an up-to-date assessment. Say, okay, this is, you really feel strongly about this, but this assessment really shows us something different. Depending on when that assessment was done, we may offer a new assessment, or we may try and offer to do something that might help the situation. So many of those situations where we do get a request for review, sometimes the assessment we were given was kind of out of date. So it was, and when we've done a new one, sometimes it changes the decision and sometimes it doesn't. But at least it's an up-to-date assessment that individual can take with them to either the mental health sector or wherever they need to go to get the support they need. So after that, there's a wait time until we complete the application package. So right now the wait time is about between a year to 18 months, and which is another reason why we ask people to register at 16 so they can be done by the time they're 18. And the assessors, they complete the application package, which consists of the application for developmental services and supports, the ADSS, and the supports intensity scale, which is the SIS. So what the SIS measures is looking at the individual being assessed, their expectations, the responsibility, what they can do right now, and then with a typical adult. So they're measuring, looking at the 3 categories, like type of support they would need, the frequency of support, and the daily support time. So, for example, maybe somebody taking a shower independently, maybe they would need prompting as the type of support. Maybe they would need it every time or just occasionally, and maybe they would need that every day, but maybe just one prompt. So that's the kind of thing that they would be measuring and discussing during the interview. So our assessors are trained and certified to complete the package in a standardized way across the province. So the training is quite intense. It's about 2 solid weeks, and the assessors across the province are all trained together, and they have to be certified. Most people don't pass the first time; they have to go and do it again, so they get recertified. So it's a very high bar that the ministry has for assessors, and then every year they have to be recertified to prevent any kind of drift in, asking the questions or. So they have to do it exactly the same way all the time across the province. So and ideally we need to not only include the individual, who is really the main part of the assessment, so we include them as much as they're able to, but 2 other people who know that person well. So at the end of that, we have a profile, and the ministry, that we then enter all the data into the ministry database. So this will be eventually completed for all individuals that are coming into the system. And then now we can do updates. So we never used to be able to do that until the past 2 years. We used to have to do a whole reassessment. Now we can do an update. So if something changes for that individual, for example, if their caregiver gets ill, or if they lose the support they had before, we can do that update. If something significantly changes in their level of support with their medical or behavioral, we might have to do a reassessment. So if somebody suddenly, their seizure disorder starts to get a lot worse, then we need to do a new assessment. Or their behaviors suddenly start to escalate, we need to do another assessment. So, so that's part of that piece. Are there any questions about the application package yet?
So, how do we get those psychological assessments? We have to pay for it?
Can you repeat
No.
the question?
I think I heard, how do we get a eligibility psychological assessment? Do we have to pay for it? No. You can if you choose to, but if you choose to go through and get one from the Surrey Place psychologist, you don't have to pay for that. There is a bit of a wait, and also there has to be a strong suspicion of developmental disability.
Do you have any other questions?
I actually have a question.
Turn on your mic.
Okay.
So we want to make sure it records properly. There you go.
So my question is coming from my clinical neuroscience, developmental neuroscience background, and I'm sure I'm not the only person to ask you this question, but we know that the frontal lobes do not complete development until close to 30 years of age, and that vulnerable age of 19 to 26, 27, the fact that, from my perspective, I still consider that to be pediatrics. I know that it's from the healthcare perspective, it's not. But those are the kids that are so vulnerable that they're away from home for the first time, they're living on their own, and if they're injured at that point, if we are able to provide evidence of that neurodevelopmentally they're not complete? Is there any way that assessors are able to take that into consideration? Since it's clearly said that if they're injured age 19 and on, or something happens age 19 and on, they do not meet criteria.
It's pretty clear that that's the guideline for us. As I said, we take a look at the whole picture.
Right.
If we have an assessment from when someone, the same person maybe was 14, but they were showing signs of learning challenges and were receiving special ed or receiving any supports in the developmental sector, we would take that into consideration. So it's kind of tough because we're trying to sometimes feel like a private investigator, like where we're trying to pull information together from different places.
Do we have any other questions? That was a really thought-provoking one, actually. Do we have any other questions?
I just wanted to mention under eligibility that everybody is sent an eligibility letter, whether they're eligible or not. And they need to keep that eligibility letter because when they're 17 and 3/4, they can take it to the ODSP office and it will help facilitate their application for ODSP. So they don't have to prove developmental disability twice. If they lose their eligibility letter in the meantime, we always have a copy and we can happily mail them a new one. But that's relatively new in the past couple of years. So that's been really helpful for some of our families. Yeah.
Quick question.
Make sure you record it.
For those who are accepted into DSO, and because I understand, I mean, there's once they're on a wait, once on the needs list, and that's a whole other ballgame. I'm just wondering if there's like 2 different types of needs lists. So, for example, those that really need services based on whatever their need is, but then also those who may not be deemed as needing quite as much need as some others. I don't know if that makes sense at all. So, for example, if somebody is looking, let's say, for example, paid employment, for example, right? So they may be having a tougher time trying to navigate the system because the needs list may not, their name may not come up for quite some time based on need. So I'm just wondering if there could be like a secondary needs list, so this way they're also being assisted, or maybe that's already being done. I don't know.
Well, it kind of leads into my next part, which is vacancy management.
Okay.
So I'm going to get to that. Let me see, where is it? Okay, here we are. So our service navigators, so the way that it works for vacancies is when we hear from an agency that they have a funded vacancy, we are now using 2 systems to match a person to that. So it's not like one is, like the level of need of anybody on either one of those lists is different. One of them is the ministry database that that I just talked about. We do an application package. We put all that information from the interviews are about 2.5 to 3 hours each. So from that 6 hours of interviewing, we've got all that information. We've put it into this ministry database to create a profile. So it's quite detailed. And then we have the community needs list is the traditional list we've always used in Toronto since the 90s. And that has different filters and different fields to fill out, but we want to make sure that people who don't have an application package yet are still being put forward for vacancies. So some people who are low priority don't have an application package done yet, because as of July 2011, when the DSO started, they were maybe on a waiting list, or maybe they were living in a group home, or they were already receiving some services. So. But they were waiting for something else. So what we do is we generate names from both lists. And we get considerable overlap with the names, which is good. And we can only put one name forward. So say if there's an opening in a job training, then we would go to the ministry database and we would plug in all the information the agency just gave us, and then look at the highest priority person in that group of names that the database would generate. And then we would go to the community needs list and do the same thing, plug in that vacancy and then see what name that database comes up with. Eventually we have to phase out that second database, but right now it's been really helpful because it has different filters than the ministry database, and it also makes sure that we're capturing everybody who should be captured, so that it's more fair. Everybody's being put forward for a vacancy who would be eligible for that vacancy. I'm not sure if that answers your question.
No, it's okay.
Okay, so the ministry database has two ways that it matches people to a vacancy. One is through match score, and that looks at support needs. So if somebody has low support needs and they're very independent, then we would only look at people in that group. And then we would look at the highest priority people in that group. So it does do two things. So it looks at support needs, people who don't need a lot of support or who need a lot of support, and then who is the most in need of that group. So that's how it works. So the application package is sent to the passport office at Family Services Toronto right away. And we don't have any funds at the DSO. All of the funds come from the ministry, are streamed straight to passport. And then they map the application package for a certain dollar amount. And then they get permission from the ministry of when to release those funds. So as of last May, with the Liberal government, when somebody was found eligible for the DSO, they were immediately also eligible for $5,000 funding from Passport. So that's been how we've been working since May. So if someone is eligible, we put their name forward for the $5,000 with their consent, and then move forward from there. Because prior to that, when people came to the DSO and they were found eligible, it was waiting for the application package before their application could even be sent to Passport and mapped and considered. So high priority people we would put forward first, but this way, everybody who comes through who's eligible gets something. So I just wanted to note that it's just very, very important that the DSO know about any kind of address change or any kind of change in that person's life, so we can update their profile, but especially so we can get a hold of them.
There's a
Are you
question.
okay if we wrap up?
Yeah.
Everyone starts with $5,000. I've actually had, in conversations with a lot of families, that range goes anywhere from 5 to 30. How does that come up? Like, how do those numbers come up? Someone receiving $5,000 or another family receiving 30. What's the criteria?
So everybody, the 5,000 is now the baseline, so that's like everybody gets that regardless of their support needs. So there were quite a few people who were receiving less than that because they got the former special services at home, which maybe would have been like 2,000 to 3,000. So they were topped up, and then now 5,000. So after the application package is done, they have a mapping tool that was given to them by the ministry. They referring to the passport office at Family Service Toronto. And so they would take that application and then they would map it according to the criteria given to them by the ministry and come up with a dollar amount. And then that's how they come up with the new dollar figure. How they release that money or when they release it, I'm not really sure because the DSO doesn't really have anything to do with that. If somebody is very high priority, sometimes the ministry will say, okay, this person is eligible for this high amount of money and they're a priority, so we can release the funds. But generally, the DSO is kind of outside that process. That's with Passport. Yeah.
Speak up, nice and loud, please.
I have clients that live in a group home setting, like for example, Bob Rumble or Rena or
Yes, they're eligible for the $5,000.
So the question was, do people living in group home settings, are they also eligible for passport funding?
Yeah, and the answer is yes, that they
A lot
are.
of the group homes don't know that. When I go there and do assessments, they say, no, they don't have passports.
They're considered very low priority because they're already receiving some services from the sector. So I think this $5,000 was immediately allocated to people who were getting nothing. So people who were eligible for the DSO but waiting for an application package and new eligibilities coming through from people graduating from school. So that was the first group that that the ministry allocated the money to. And then now they're starting to work on the individuals who were migrated into the system who probably are living in group homes and other residential settings. So it's going to take a while. They're pretty busy over there at the passport office. Any other questions? Okay. So just thinking about 18 and turning 18 and the transition, just thinking about consent changes. We don't ask parents for consent anymore. We want the individual to make consent, provide consent to the best of their ability. Different funding changes like special services at home ending, transportation options change, health changes, pediatricians often close and then transferring on into the adult health system. So we have a partnership with Sick Kids Hospital with their Good to Go program. So if they have kids with developmental issues, that they contact us and we provide we help them transition so that it's a little bit seamless for them. So we can help with that. So we get the eligibility documents from the hospital and we get everything in advance so that's kind of ready to go. So that kind of transition before preparing prior to age 18 and keeping some of these things in mind is so important. And then another big transition at 21 with the end of school. Okay, so we have service navigators as well as assessors of the DSO. So the service navigators, they do a lot of the information provision I was talking about. They register the people on the different registries, the different lists. They update profiles. They do all of the vacancy management, the matching and linking. And if someone needs a referral to say urgent response, respite, they would help with all of those kind of ongoing needs. So just overall stats, if you look at the past few years, we serve approximately 4,000 people a year. So those would be people who received a service from us. They didn't just make a phone call. They were either matched to a vacancy or considered for a vacancy. They were deemed eligible. They had an app pack done. They had an urgent response application. So it's everything the DSO does that we provided that function. Some individuals received multiple functions. So the number eligible is approximately 600 a year. We have 245 waiting for confirmation, so they phone to register, but they don't have an assessment. They're waiting for an assessment, or they just haven't sent us in their health card or something. So every 3 months we go through that list and we call them and give them a gentle reminder to get their documents in. Approximately 100 people are ineligible, so not too many really when you think of all the people coming through. So they actually don't meet the criteria. And we have about between 60 to 18 years, approximately 250 to 300, in addition to the 600 who are eligible. But they're not, the ministry considers them ineligible because they're not yet 18, so they can't receive services, but they actually meet the eligibility criteria for the DSO. And we complete about 1,200 assessments a year. So for transitions, it's just really like getting information from us, from the DSO, but also looking at getting information from health, connectability, just kind of reaching out and to all of the different resources that are out there, and so much good stuff that's online. And any other questions or comments?
I just wondered if that database is province-wide, and if it's an urgent case and there are no spaces in the community where the person lives, is it possible to look outside that community and somewhere else in Ontario?
The database is province-wide. However, each DSO region can only see the people in their region. But I can ask for read-only rights with somebody who might be in another region or crossing 2 regions. An individual can be on a wait list for all 9 regions if they want to. Usually when someone's in an urgent situation, we don't do cross-regional unless somebody has requested it. So if somebody says, okay, I'm open to a residence maybe in Central East, Central West, Hamilton region, everything bordering Toronto as well as Toronto, then we would open up the rights for those, and they could be considered for vacancies in the exact same way that they would if they lived in Toronto. So, you know, they don't have to go to like for example, Central West region, they wouldn't have to look at everybody in their region first. Ours would be integrated in as if they lived in that region. It never used to be that way. It used to be handled differently in every different DSO, but now we have some consistency. So if someone is a high priority and high need and they meet the support requirement for that space, then they would be considered.
We have time for one more question. Keisha?
Yeah. Hi Karen.
Hi.
Karen, you talked in here about around the decision making and consent, and that you don't involve the caregivers or the parents or an adult in that. And I don't know about the other neurodevelopmental disabilities, but as the decision making and informed consent is a landmine for people, because we know that the brain damage impairs their ability to make good decisions for themselves. So I'm just wondering if you're going to be doing any research or looking at how that is actually going to play out and work out in the DSO for the population, that you're just allowing them to make decisions for themselves.
Yeah, and this has come up for sure. We often, you know, like we really want someone who is 18 and able to consent for themselves to have that independence.
Yes.
But that doesn't mean that we're like shutting the door to everybody else.
Okay.
It's really looking at the whole system around that individual, and you know, and if there's definitely like a substitute decision maker, or there's people who apply for guardianship, power of attorneys, whatever, we take all of those, of course, into consideration. And quite often we might say, okay, we want you to sign the consent, but maybe we'd like your caregiver to co-sign it or witness it. Or if somebody is saying no to everything, then it's maybe reaching out. Is it okay if I talk to your parents about this, so that we can, if you have any questions, they can answer your questions for you, and so to really bring in to bring in lots of support. So it's not as cut and dried as it sounds, but it's really just trying to respect that independence that comes now with age 18.
But you're going to have some good data that will help all of us understand how it's working and working out, and how you've adapted it, and you know, kind of accommodated it to make sure it works well for everybody.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Karen.